on this moment and expect your happiness to last, 'cause the illusions dwell in the past. And every time you start wanting or trying to be free, the mind is ever knowing that one can only be a one can only be. If you're looking, you'll never find. Don't try to keep up or you'll be left behind. The joke is over. Take a look at the end and begin again. 'Cause everything has been here for you. It's all been at your hand. But don't try to build a new world. Just learn to live on the land. Come on back to God's hand. 'Cause you are what you look at. This whole world you can be. Just give yourself up to your love. Give your love to be free. Go on, give your love to be free. Go on, give your love to be free.
This podcast assumes that you have a general knowledge of the Tate LaBianca murders. Sharon Tate Polanski, Jay Sebring, Wojciech Frykowski, Abigail Folger, and Stephen Parent were murdered on Cielo Drive in Los Angeles on August 9, 1969. Lena and Rosemary LaBianca were slain in their Los Feliz residence the following night. Charles Manson, Charles Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Quenwinkle, and Leslie Van Houten were convicted of those murders. Say hello to the Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast. And hello. Welcome to Live 5 of the Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast. It's been a while since I've been here, and obviously I forgot to turn off the loop feature for the music, so I'm sorry it overlapped the introduction. Over into the comments right now and see if anybody. Everything all right? Nobody's saying otherwise. Okay. We're going to assume everything's okay. I'm going to start this episode. I was going to originally start to do a show about the Susan Atkins book, The Myth of Helter Skelter, but then I realized that that book was just the final testament in 4 books, testaments that Susan has given. And those testaments are her grand jury testimony, her testimony during the penalty phase of the trial, her first book, Child of Satan, Child of God, and her second and last posthumous book, The Myth of Helter Skelter. And I want to go through all of these versions of her story and see what she says in each one, compare, contrast. She's changed her story quite a bit in a lot of ways, but in other ways, she hasn't changed them at all. And so I'm thinking if we look at everything, we might be able to determine what actually is the truth that's coming out of Susan Atkins' mouth, and that's a big mystery. So I have as a guest to help me here this evening is James Dawson. He's been on before. He is the Manson Archives, and I'm going to bring him up right now, and we're going to say hello to him. And here he comes. So are you there, James?
Hello, everyone. Hey, George.
You can hear me okay?
I can hear you just great.
Okay, very good. Anyway, you know what we're doing here. We're going to look at Susan Atkins, starting with her grand jury testimony, going through her penalty phase testimony, Child of Satan, Child of God, and The Myth of Helter Skelter, and see where she's changed her story and possibly determine why, see where she hasn't changed her story and possibly determine why. So I'm going to start off a little bit. So of course, Susan's gone back and forth. A lot of people have with the crimes, varying degrees of loyalty and blame giving. I'll start off with the grand jury testimony, which is very interesting because what we want to talk about here are her impressions of life at Spawn's Ranch, what Charles Manson was really like, and the dynamics that led up to the Tate LaBianca murders. And we're going to get into the dynamics and the timeline of that later, which is interesting, but that has to do with the myth of Goodbye Helter Skelter, as well as with my own book, the myth of Helter Skelter.
In your book, Goodbye Helter Skelter.
My myth is Goodbye Helter Skelter. That's not a myth, that's reality. Okay, so anyway, we're going to start off with Susan's impressions of Charles Manson that she gave at her earliest that we know of recorded testimony would be for the grand jury testimony. And the question from Vincent Bugliosi, how else would you describe Charlie? Susan said, he has more love to give to the world than anybody I have ever met. He would give himself completely to anybody. And then as far as the life at the Spawn Ranch, she says, it was beautiful, very, very peaceful. We took care of the ranch and George. We took care of each other. We all made love with each other and got over our inhibitions and inadequate feelings and became very uninhibited. We used to dance all the time. And Bugliosi asked, in terms of love or hate, how would you describe the family? And Susan responded, love completely. It was love in the group, complete love. We never despised anybody. We never hated anybody. We took in anybody that wanted to come in and was willing to give up everything they had for us. We all gave up each other's wants to each other. And we loved the whole world, everything in it, everything. And you love people in addition to the family, of course. So listening to Susan Atkins talk at the earliest record we have of what she's saying, everything at Spawn's Ranch was love, and Charles Manson especially was love. So it sounds like that was what she thought at the time. And we're going to get into a little bit later of what you thought at the time as opposed to what you think now, and did it mean what you thought at the time was any less real? But we'll talk about that later once we've gotten through all these things. The second record that we have of Susan Atkins talking about her life with Manson and her friends was the testimony she gave at the penalty phase of the murder trial. And this was in February 1971, so about 14 months after she gave her grand jury testimony. A lot of interesting thing in the penalty testimony. You can really go into that and go around, but I'm just going to bring up some of the things here. She explained that the copycat motive to get Bobby Beausoleil out of jail was the motive for the Tate LaBianca murders. Susan says that the idea for those murders was Linda Kasabian's. She talks a lot about Bugliosi coaching her for her testimony. It's very interesting when you get into this because she starts talking about the meeting she had with Bugliosi the day before her grand jury testimony, which I believe is December 5th. If I said the 6th, I was mistaken, but it's December 5th. And it's funny because when she starts talking in her penalty phase testimony about how Bugliosi was coaching her and making suggestions about how she should answer questions, about what answers she give, and she's saying, well, I just said whatever he told me to say because that's what I wanted to, because according to her, he promised immunity, not immunity, but not to seek the death penalty, not only for her, but also for all of her co-defendants.
But there's a thing, too, that you can kind of say, if you go back and you read, which I did go back and read, and I've got some of it screenshot here on my phone.
Okay.
To pull up if needed. When she's asked about Helter Skelter, Charlie and Helter Skelter, she's asked, where did you hear it from? And she said, Charlie. Then she backpedals, and then she says, I don't like to say Charlie.
Right.
I like to say the words came from his mouth. She backpedals that.
Right.
There's a clear indication there of being coached.
Right. And what also is clear is how much Bugliosi is objecting and trying to get her to shut up and having the judge make her stop talking. And this is all hearsay. It's irrelevant. It's not, it's interesting. He suddenly springs to life when she's saying that, well, he told me everything to say. It's not really, I just wanted to say what he wanted to hear. And he really reacts, and you can see that in the testimony. And that's what's very interesting to me about reading trial testimony, because you get such a bigger picture of the story than just reading a summary of it in a book or seeing
Right.
a documentary. There's all kinds of little gems in there, and you can't go wrong. So I would recommend anybody you should really read the penalty phase testimony of this trial, and you can get that on cielodrive.com under their trial transcript sections. But in any way, let's see, what else have I got here? She said that she was reluctant to testify. There's a lot of stuff in there about how they took her testimony and sold it as a book, and the shenanigans with Caballero and Caruso. Once again, she says it's Linda's idea. She also says she lied at the grand jury, and she said that she lied at the grand jury for this odd reason. And the reason she said that Charles Manson ordered the murders during the grand jury at the grand jury testimony was because she wanted his attention. Now, I'm not familiar with too many people who want attention and what they do to get it, but her idea was, well, if I can link him to me in this super crime, then we'll both get attention and we'll be together. And I guess that's something that people want, but that's kind of an odd thing to me, to have somebody say attention so much if you didn't say that. She also says that, let's see, she says she took, and this is again at the penalty phase, she said she took acid on both murder nights. One thing that's interesting I noticed about the penalty phase testimony is Bugliosi throughout addresses her as Sadie. And this is something he also does, I noticed during Charles Watson's trial, where he always refers to him as Tex.
Right.
Because I think he's trying to reinforce the notion of these people not being, as being what Charlie's puppets, i.e. Tex and Sadie, rather than Charles and Susan. I kind of wish Watson had said, my name is Charles, and I wish you would call me Charles. It's also interesting that during the grand jury testimony, when Bugliosi wanted cooperation from Susan Atkins, he addresses her as Susan. Once she's in the penalty phase and he doesn't need her anymore and he can treat her like a dirty dirtbag murderer, he keeps calling her Sadie. But it's noticeable in both that and Tex Watson's trial how much Bugliosi is hammering home the images of Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, and Charles Watson. So that's something that you can see. Again, Linda directed the murder night. What's odd, another thing that's very unbelievable about Susan's penalty phase testimony is that she says that Leslie Van Houten was at Gary Hinman's house.
Right.
She says that Charles Manson was not even along on the second night.
Right.
So these are things that are so contrary to what we believe that you would almost not believe anything she said. She also said that she killed Gary Hinman, not Bobby Beausoleil.
Right.
And she also said that Linda Kasabian had gone in and out of the house at Cielo Drive.
Right. See, that's something that, because it should be noted that you read the book form of The Myth of Helter Skelter, whereas I read the rough draft.
Okay.
In the rough draft, she specifically says that Linda sharpened the knives, Linda handed out the knives, and then when the murders were over, Linda collected knives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she didn't want to tell Tex that she lost her knife.
Mm-hmm.
And when they get in the car and she doesn't hand the knife back to Linda, she has to tell Tex, and she says Tex wanted to turn the car around and go back and look for it.
Yeah. I couldn't see doing that.
No, I can't see that.
That would be a predicament to be in.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, that's in the rough draft.
Okay.
She didn't testify to any of that.
No. Again, at the penalty phase, Susan Atkins says that she stabbed Sharon Tate. Once again, she says over and over again, it was a copycat plan was the motive, and that she lied at the grand jury. So you've got several things here that she's going to come back against and say, no, I didn't mean that. In fact, I think you sent me, James, a tape of her at one of her parole hearings where she said that everything,
too, I believe it was.
Everything I said at the 1978, at the penalty phase was a lie, and that everything I said at the grand jury was true. Now, I think probably the reason she did that was because by that time she realized, hey, I can get out but I'm not going to get out if I go against anything that's in the court record. So she, went back to her grand jury testimony because that was the official story, and I think she figured if she stuck to that, she'd have a better chance of getting paroled.
Yes, but it was that one where Bugliosi had to eventually admit she didn't kill Sharon Tate.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if this is in the rough draft, and of course, the rough draft is the rough draft. I have the impression that the book itself was finished by James Whitehouse.
Yes.
It seems like it was.
It was.
And seen some in parole hearings, and he's very persuasive in those, much more so than he is in this book. He spends a lot of time, and Susan has also in other venues emphasizing that I swear to God I did not kill Sharon Tate. So it's very important to her that, even though she was right there next to him, she didn't strike the blow. So there's a fine line of distinction there that's important to her. And so
Go ahead, George. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
While it's on my mind, we know, like in Child of Satan, Child of God, on page 116, she specifically says, the prosecutor failed to see the impact the shooting of the black man had on the future events.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but if we go back to her 1985 transcript, her parole hearing, I'm just going to read a little excerpt from the deputy DA, okay? This is concerning Bobby Beausoleil.
Is this Kay?
Okay, it says Susan Atkins testified at her own parole hearing on Tuesday, December the 31st of 1985, and this was at CIW, and I have the transcript in front of me. I'm looking at pages 59 and 60 of December 31st, 1985 transcript, where she was asked by a few questions by a board member. Actually, two different board members asked her, did you at any time think that Bobby Beausoleil was there to collect money on a drug deal? Susan Atkins responded both times, no, sir.
Mm-hmm.
So see, there's a change in the story there.
Yeah. Well, I honestly don't know what they knew, and it'd be easy to say they didn't know if they were just going along for the ride. You wouldn't know.
What Ella Jo Bailey said, because it was Ella Jo Bailey who said that Gary Hinman won that lottery, the $20,000 on the scratch-off lottery ticket.
Mm-hmm. And probably because she said that, she might have realized that she instigated his demise, and that's why she disappeared right after that.
Right.
So I think that's a sign.
So we know in 1985 she's changed her story again.
Yes. So I know I'm not going to get into that because there's so many hearings, and as I say, I looked at a few myself and found some interesting different things that she said. Like I don't know. She did say at the one I looked at that Linda did go in the house at least once. So I don't know if she can keep her story straight. I don't know.
She did. Now with Linda in Child of Satan, Child of God, I've got the page numbers listed here. Mm-hmm. On page 138, she says Linda remained outside. On page 141, Linda came into the house. That's when she asked Sadie to do something, make it stop. Mm-hmm. Then page 142, Linda's gone again. Then on page 143, Linda's already back at the car. Mm-hmm. But she puts Linda in the house twice.
Okay. Yeah. So as I think about earlier, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Linda was in the house. So that's not.
Yeah, it's noted that all the girls were barefoot, and then I got to thinking, their feet were going to be pretty scratched up and bleeding, regardless. Even if Susan had an infection on her feet, like she claimed, because she goes into detail about climbing that stone wall to get over to the gate, and she said that all three girls were barefoot.
Mm-hmm. However, I will have to say this: I've known women who spent a lot of time barefoot, and their feet were amazingly tough. I've seen them run across the desert in Gold or Wash over those rocks in bare feet.
That does happen.
We were out there once, and something happened to one of the kids, and the woman, Lori Waldman, ran right out over the rocks to see what was wrong. It didn't affect her at all. So you can have pretty tough feet. I've never worked my feet up to that degree of toughness.
No.
I think you can get there.
Just on a rock, I'm already cussing.
Well, so let me ask you, since we're on the subject of Child of Satan, Child of God, what are her impressions of Manson and life at Spawn's Ranch that she gives in the book.
It's almost identical to what she testified to during the grand jury.
Yeah.
Then she starts to go into this little trip where Charlie called a meeting for her, and he asked her if she was scared of the gas chamber, and she said when she was back under Charlie's spell, she was no longer scared.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a search on the words. There was threats. The word threat was only mentioned 2 times, and it had nothing to do with Charlie. This had to do with Bernard Crowe, the shooting of Bernard Crowe, and the phone call made.
Mm-hmm.
And there was like a little retaliation where Tex had threatened Cappy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's it. I mean, it's basically what she testified to, but with just a little sympathy, because most of the book itself, it mostly focuses on the Satan part, where she talks about being with Anton LaVey and going to Anton's house, Church of Satan, all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's what mostly half of the first book is about, to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
But
so she's basically saying everything was pretty harmonious, and aside from a couple instances.
She did say that she did, yeah. She did say that she saw Charlie hit somebody twice.
Pardon me?
She did say that Charlie did hit someone twice, and it's because they were laughing at him. And he said, he looked at Susan and he said, "You won't ever laugh at me."
Mm-hmm. Well, hitting back then was a lot common than it is now. I'll say that. I know that for a fact. I was disciplined in school by teachers that would hit you.
Mm-hmm.
That was normal back then.
Oh, yeah.
So, it was normal for Dad to hit and whip you with a belt or roundhouse punch you, but to smack you,
lot to do with the time.
That was pretty normal. Not beating you with table legs or anything. So, okay. So we're getting into, we've got the grand jury testimony where everything's fine, no problems with Charlie. She doesn't really give a list of motive there. Then we have the penalty phase testimony where still no problems at the ranch. Everything's fine with Charlie. And she's giving the motive that it was to get brother out of jail. And then in Child of Satan, Child of God, she's apparently saying there were a couple of little bumps, but basically nothing. Now, when did you say that there was a time, because we're going to get to this later, because once we get to this book, she pulls out all the stops.
Yeah.
And from that book on, it's basically, she's looking back. Everything about Charles Manson was evil. It's like, now that I think about it, maybe he was conning me. He was probably conning me from day one and everybody else. And the whole thing was a con. Now, and I talked to you about this on the phone a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit later about how can you decide when is a con and what is not a con. But she says right from the beginning, Charles Manson was a self-centered, abusive, drug-addicted ex-con. That's her take on Charles Manson. Everything he did was to get drugs. He got people now. So that's quite a step from what she was saying before, and it starts on page 1 basically and goes throughout the whole book about how he manipulated people and ruined everybody's lives and didn't care about anybody but himself, which doesn't explain why he hung around. Because if he was really such a dirtbag, he would have said, "Oh, you want to burn the ranch down? Go ahead. I'm leaving because I don't care about these people." But instead, he went down and tried to take care of it and shot the guy. There was one thing that Susan says in this book, and it's kind of hard for me to understand. She does go through the whole thing about Crow, and I want to get to that later because that's the comparison that's been made with my book as Crow being the catalyst for everything, and that the Tate LaBianca murders were actually the last two parts of a violent series of events that happened at that summer, starting with the shooting of Bernard Crowe. Crowe, Hinman, Tate LaBianca, logically flowing. So that's one thing. You say she mentioned that in her book, Child of Satan, Child of God, that was the beginning of the thing. She also emphasizes it in this book and says that Bugliosi missed it completely. And as that's what I've said too, that the catalyst for all the violent events was Charles Watson's ripoff of Bernard.
That's what she
I don't
says.
believe all these. Go.
Because
Go ahead.
from the rough draft, she said, how did the prosecutor, Vincent Bugliosi, make the mistake of concluding that Helter Skelter, a black-white race war that would bring on Armageddon, was the motive for the Tate LaBianca those murders at 150 Cielo Drive? The most obvious reason is that Mr. Bugliosi didn't look at the events that led to these murders in chronological order. If you don't study what happened in order and how it happened, how can you even understand why the occurrence followed another?
Right. Right. And that's the conclusion that she came to, and that's the conclusion that I came to. And my book actually was written in about 1999. I actually published in 2014, but I actually had most of it written in 2000. So that was a conclusion that I reached just looking at basic evidence of the case. And obviously, Crow started everything. And so Susan Atkins is verifying that. And even Charles Manson has said that in one recent interview. He lays down that series of events. And let's see, I'm trying to think. This is the wrong page, so just bear with me. Okay. You loved other people, second book. Okay, the fourth book. No, we're good. Okay. Moving right along. So let me just play this so to give everybody an idea of in 1986, the sequence of events from Crow to Tate LaBianca here played out. Here's how it comes from Charles Manson himself. So stand by. I hope this works because I haven't tried this technique before. Here's Charles Manson explaining how the Tate LaBianca murders grew out of the shooting of Bernard Crow from the Charlie Rose interview in 1986.
No family. There was no Manson family. There was a group of people that were having a good time. They say you told them, the leader business, you told them to go murder. That's what they testified.
No.
Did Watson testify to that?
No.
Did Watson say that?
No.
Did he write a book and say that?
He may have said it in his book after he convinced himself of it.
Yeah, he did.
But he said this basically, this is what I thought Charlie wanted me to do.
Yeah.
See, what happens when you're dealing in the street and you're dealing in life and death? Life and death is going by you like this every day.
Right.
There's a guy with a knife.
But you're not dealing in the street. You're up in the mountains playing a guitar.
No, this is where my thought is running, see? You guys sit down, you compute all this, and you know, this all, but to me this goes by, like I may face life and death situations 4 times a day, like it was dust on my shoulder, you dig? So Tex has a little problem, he has a little problem, he gives me a gun, he can't deal with it, I have to go deal with his problem.
Which is?
I have to go shoot somebody for him. Because he's too much of a coward, and he's laying up underneath the bed with it.
Who'd you shoot?
I had to shoot lots of Papa.
Who?
Some guy down there trying to take care of some business that was not my business. So Tex owed me one. So when I come back and I say, see, you got me in trouble. Every time I stand up for you, brother, I got to face your life and your death. You dig? I'm tired of carrying you on my back. And I threw the gun. I said, now you owe me one. And if you don't pay me when you owe me, then I'm going to pay you what you owe me. You see what I'm saying? In other words, I have to go into another person and put on another face and come back and play, you know.
I understand. So you say to Tex, you owe me one.
That's right. So then when my brother gets busted and my brother's in jail, then I tell Tex, pay him what you owe me. Well, I said, don't tell me nothing. I don't want to hear nothing. I'm not part of no conspiracy. I'm not breaking no laws. You dig what I'm saying? I'm not getting involved in nothing. However you do it, you do it. I don't care how you do it, but don't bring it to me. I just come back and think, sir, I got a traffic ticket.
But that's not what they say.
Who's they? Who's they said that?
Susie Atkins.
No, Susan Atkins never said I said do anything except do what Tex said. And I did say that. I said, Susie, you owe me? She says, yeah. I said, you remember the 3 dudes I fought for you? She said, yeah. I said, remember that other dude I cut his ears off for you?
Yeah.
She says, yeah. I said, well, then pay that to Tex. Don't bother me with it.
All right.
Okay, so you there?
I'm here.
Okay, that's pretty clear from the man himself, one after the other chain of events, as far as I can see. So, and that's perfectly logical and believable to me. Now, one thing that's interesting about the Crow incident is that Susan introduces a theme that she says Charlie utilized throughout the murders, and that was that he went into the apartment where Crow was with T.J. Wallerman with a gun in the back of his pants and instructed TJ to pull the gun out and shoot it if he had, and shoot Crow if he had to. And Susan's saying that that's Charlie's way of getting other people to break the law for him and commit murders for him. Now, then she goes on to say something that's also I've heard from other people making excuses, is that once everybody knew that Charlie, or thought rather, that Charlie had killed a black man, they had something on him, and so that he manipulated them to commit murders so that he would have something on them. Now, I really don't understand how that theory is supposed to work. I guess if you don't think about it at all, it might sound logical. But I just can't see, we've talked about this before. If you kill somebody for something, that's a little different than loaning them your car.
Right. Yeah.
That's on your end? Okay, you're outside. Okay.
Yeah.
Looks good. Good background. That's a little different, and it takes it up to a new level of intensity and favors. It's not just like, Susan says, oh, he was beating Bobby over the head with the fact that he had to shoot Crow to save the family, as if that's annoying. That, if I had to commit murder for you, I'm sorry, I'm going to be serious and kind of insistent about it. I'm not beating you over the head with it to try to make you do something. It's, you really owe me a big favor.
And Sadie owed him a big favor.
You won't pay me what you owe me. I'm going to pay you what you owe me. And that's serious stuff. So yeah. I see where, the way I've explained it, there's a logical reason for those people who have gone out and done it. And it's not because they were forced or coerced or tricked. It's because they felt an obligation to a person who had already killed for them. Now, he hadn't, but they thought he had.
Right.
That raised the bar of commitment among those group of people. Not all of those people met that raised bar, but the ones who owed favors to Charlie, Charles Watson, who ripped off Crow and started everything, Susan Atkins, who he had to fight for, Linda Kasabian, who he had to deal with her angry husband after she stole the money, and of course Pat Krenwinkel, was just loved him and would do anything for him. But that to me is a much more believable explanation as to why these people went out and killed, rather than they were brainwashed, they were tricked, or any other reason that's that we don't really know the answer to, like some of these drug motives where it's all nebulous and we don't know who did what and what happened. And so as far as I'm concerned, that's a reasonable explanation to explain why those people did those murders. And they did it on their own, and they did it because they were a group of people who loved each other that much. Those murders did come out of love.
And when Charlie shot Crow, that did cause a bit of paranoia, because he thought he actually killed someone for Tex Watson.
Sure.
So that's completely understandable as well.
Right. But as I say, that's the level that we're at, killing. So, you have to, a lot of things, and Susan says in her testimonies how crazy Tex was acting, and he was. He was an out of control murder machine. Have you ever done amphetamines or anything like that?
Not speed, no.
No. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, I could see it. Yep.
Yeah, not speed.
There was a time when I was younger, I would try things, and I could see that was enough, that I could see where it was attractive to people. I could also see where it wasn't anything I wanted to get involved in, because I could also see it going the other way. So unfortunately, a lot of people who do speed, they don't never pick up on the fact that it's ruining them. And because it's a it's kind of a reassuring thing. You have a lot of confidence when you're on it. So how can you be doing anything wrong if you just keep doing it? You're doing things right. So
right.
It's not a good thing to ingest.
Just asked something. It says, how long until they learned Papa wasn't dead? They actually found out he wasn't dead around the time of the penalty phase of the trial.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that was something Bugliosi and in Child of Satan, Child of God, Susan kind of like, when Bugliosi learned that, then he learned that there was kind of like that the love of brother motive was getting true. Mm-hmm. So he even admits it in Helter Skelter that he wasn't giving it any credence.
Right.
And
And he also says in Helter Skelter that I didn't want to spend too much time on it with the jury demolishing it, as he says, because he didn't want them thinking that it might be true.
right, because Charlie would have walked.
Right, exactly. So
And but
not going to be allowed to happen.
they learned during the penalty phase that Crow was still alive. And then Mike says when the news of the murder came across the TV that Saturday, they were all watching, and one of the girls said, "The soul really picked a good one this time."
Mm-hmm.
That might have been Susan who said that. And I believe, she does cite that in Child of Satan, Child of God.
She says that she said that?
She was watching the news and she said
Mm-hmm.
it.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, we're gonna get back to Susan's credibility when we get to the end of all this, because obviously there are areas where her credibility is not very good, but then on the other hand, there are areas where her credibility might be good. I think that even pathological liars can sometimes inadvertently tell the truth, even when they're not aware of it.
Yeah.
And I think she's an example of that, as is Charles Watson.
I get messages all the time, George, and they're asking, well, how do you know what to believe and what not to believe? And I said, you have to dissect. It takes a long time. You
Yeah.
have to dissect every single statement.
You do.
And compare it with the facts.
Right.
And compare it with the evidence. And
you have to compare it with known facts and evidence. You can say anything you want about anybody, but if somebody says something happened and you look at the circumstances and it fits, that is an indication that maybe that actually did happen that way.
Right.
Not necessarily insisting that it's true, but there are a lot of instances where people put up theories where you can say it's demonstrably false because of the physical evidence. So, but with this, how do you know who to believe and what not to believe? Unfortunately, with these people, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
I can't think of anybody, including Manson, that hasn't contradicted himself or contradicted the known narrative. Bobby Beausoleil back and forth, Mary Brunner back and forth, Leslie Van Houten back and forth, Susan Atkins, texts all over the place. It's just really hard when you're dealing with these group of people trying to find out what's true. You do have certain evidence that you can match up to. You have timelines. You have, where people were, dynamics of person and things like that factor in. And maybe it's obvious that with this case, for a lot of people, I think searching for the answer has become what they want out of this case, is not getting an answer, but searching for an answer. So when I searched for an answer, I found one that I thought was reasonable, and I have yet to have anyone take the copycat theory and the chain of events from Crow to him and to Tate LaBianca and show why that isn't a good version of events.
We're talking about this, and I want to give a good example. On page 136 of Child of Satan, Child of God, Susan says Charlie told her to go with Tex and do what Tex says, and to get a change of clothes. She returned with her items, and Charlie and Tex were talking. Tex was supposedly the only person to know where they were going. But if Tex knew where they were going, how did they get lost? She said they ended up on Mulholland Drive.
Right. Well, I mean, that, I guess you could take a wrong turn. I mean, we know Tex Watson had been to Cielo Drive many times, and with Terry Melcher was there and possibly lived there for a while. So he should have known how to get there, which isn't to say that in his condition, he couldn't have taken the wrong turn. Of course, we don't know, getting lost might not be the right,
Linda testified that they were on the interstate almost an hour because they got lost.
Linda said that? Wow.
And that corroborates Susan that they got lost.
Okay.
So if Tex knew where Tex was going, how did they get lost?
Well, he obviously he eventually knew where he was going, so he got his bearings.
He got him Mulholland
house. But yeah, that's interesting. That would show that perhaps he didn't have the familiarity with Cielo Drive that some people think he did. But when you look at Terry Melcher's testimony, he was there.
Only been there a couple of times.
Yeah, and but Melcher said, I was out of town. That he might have lived there for all I know when I wasn't there. Melcher loaned him his car, his credit card. So there was a lot more close-knit stuff going on there than maybe a lot of the people in show business want to admit.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get rid of this guy, because if I hit this again, Charlie will come up, and which wouldn't be too bad, but it wouldn't be appropriate because he's already
Yeah,
spoken.
Linda testified that they were on the road for 45 minutes to an hour. And if we look at the timeline, Rudy Weber called the police at 1 o'clock. If you look at Susan's testimony, she said that she heard the chimes in the house ring at midnight.
Okay. And we know that Seymour Cott's wife heard gunshots around 12 o'clock. I'm putting the timeline between around midnight and around 1 o'clock when they went to Rudolph Weber's.
Rudy, the police report shows that Rudy Weber called the police at 1 a.m. when they were outside watching.
He called them. Okay, well, that makes it even tighter. So they weren't at that house very long.
It had to have been 30 minutes, 35 minutes to the most, because Rudy, I looked at the distance, Rudy only lived 6 minutes away.
Mm-hmm.
So that's about a mile.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's tighter than that even. That just leaves them enough time to go in and kill everybody, which is what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't give them much time to look for anything or ransack the place. The main difference, also, I do want to acknowledge the similarities between my book and this book, because we do emphasize the importance of the timeline and missing the fact that the Crow was the instigator of the whole thing. And that fact has been called to my attention by none other than Brian Davis. So I want to acknowledge it. Brian is the only one who actually noticed that. When I was working on this book, a friend of mine said he knew what angle I was taking, and he said, have you seen Susan Atkins' new book? And I thought, no, I haven't. He says, well, you might want to read it. And I read it, and I said, boy, she's saying the exact same thing I'm saying as far as the Crow being the first in the series of 4 crimes. And I thought, well, if she's already putting it out there so clearly and understandably, maybe there's no point in me even doing my book. But then I realized that since, according to Susan, the motivation for the crime was Charlie getting money for drugs and everything else, because apparently, I mean, I don't know what kind of drugs she's expecting him to be in.
Right. She said that they had enough. She said that Charlie had gotten enough drugs to cover for that straight Satan biz. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say he didn't get some drugs, but I mean, it seems to be an overriding theme with Susan that Charlie was just drugs.
Yes.
Like the crazy lust for drugs. And the difference between my book and her book is she says that was his motivation, and I say that his motivation, actions were motivated by love and honor. So it's a slight difference.
Well, in Child of Satan, Child of God, when Charlie shot Crow, that's when she starts on the Helter Skelter trip. Mm-hmm. And she said she started believing Helter Skelter was real. Mm-hmm. But then she said whenever she would, like I said, with the meeting with Charlie she had, he asked her if she was scared of the gas chamber. That was on page, what was it? 164. She said that she just felt she wasn't scared anymore back under his presence. Mm-hmm. So he supposedly manipulated her or conned her into feeling safe again. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, most of speaking of Helter Skelter, if you look at her penalty testimony, that thinking came from Paul Watkins.
Yeah, and I did some reading with his stuff too.
9. Do you have crickets there?
Yeah, I live right by, not too far from a little pond.
Oh, no, there's frogs then?
What's that?
Frogs?
Yeah, there's a little pond right over here beside me.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we get tree frogs here. Sometimes they get in the house. It's really cool. Okay, so Susan Atkins, basically in this book, she's saying he was an evil con man from the word go. And here's what I want to bring up, something else that we talked about earlier on the phone briefly, you and I. When you're talking about someone who's conning you, first of all, I think you can only con somebody who wants to be conned. Eventually they're going to say no more. But the thing about me is, Charlie rather, is that how do you tell the difference between someone who's conning you and someone who's being straight with you and showing a genuine interest in you and your feelings? I mean, where does that become a con? All this business about how to win friends and influence people. I don't know if you've read that book. It's a very interesting book, and you should read it just to see how there are techniques and strategies for communicating with people and interacting with them. It's very interesting. And it all, to me, though, a lot of it made common sense from my life's experience. I know how to talk to people already. So Charlie's the same way. He's very engaging, very interesting. I had a little picture here I think I can show everybody that this is a quote from, let's see, where did I put that? And I don't believe I have it here. I can probably add it. Here we go. Just let me bring this up because I want to show you an example of what I'm talking about. When Diane Lake's book came out, of course, she did all the tours and everything and went on every show, and she's still on every show, I guess, as part of her contract. But this is a little piece out of People magazine when her book first came out. It's a little quote, and it says, Charlie had the ability to pick up on people's needs and desires and fulfill them. Now, what's bad about that?
If you look at the situation, some of the kids, and we can call them kids because some of them were 18 to 20, we'll say 26. A lot of the kids were tossed out of their homes for stupid reasons.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have a family. The family just tossed them aside, some of them. And they looked to him as a father figure. And as a father figure, he provided for them as they needed.
Mm-hmm.
And basically taught them how to survive.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And what's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. So
it shows love.
Yeah, it shows love, not a connivance. I mean, sure, you can go along with somebody and you're straight with them going back and forth for what? How many? 2, 3, 5, 10 years, and then suddenly you decide, hey, I'd like their car, and they leave it out. Why not?
Yeah,
it's a thin line. Who did he con? Supposedly, I guess the only people he conned were the people he supposedly tricked into committing murders for him. But I don't know of anybody else he conned. I'll have to tell you this. I met quite a few of so-called family members outside. And not one of the people who was with Charlie, who was outside, had any bad memories of him or anything of their life together. It's all these people that are inside and trying to get out. And I think this is Charlie Manson is so far gone, he's not getting out ever. Everybody already thinks he's the worst person that ever lived. He's kind of playing into it. He's not doing any favors with all his murder talk during the interviews and all the stuff he does. So why not put the blame on him? It doesn't matter. He's been flushed, man. You see,
yep.
One could rationalize that. If you decided, those people back then did what they did out of their own free will, and they made commitments to each other. Granted, when you're 20, 22, you have no idea how long your life is going to be.
Exactly.
So when you get into prison and all of a sudden you realize, Jesus, this has been 45 years of this stuff. How can I get out of here? Maybe if I say what they want me to say, maybe if I blame this guy who's terrible and is acting like he's terrible, maybe it would help my case. I mean, that's what I think a lot of the motivation is. They see Charlie as kind of, he's gone. He's not getting out. It's the same with Bobby Beausoleil at his second trial. Charlie told him, I'm not getting out. Why don't you tell them I stabbed Hinman and then you get out? And then if one of us out is better than two of us in. And so, sure, why not?
And
it's almost like he gave them permission to do that.
That's what I was fixing to say because, I've got an acquaintance that's hopefully will get back to me soon on something you and I talked about because it's starting to make more sense that way. And that's not a con if you think about it.
What's that?
What you just said about Bobby.
Yeah.
That's not conning him. That's almost an ultimate act of love. If
Well,
you can get out on me, get out.
Yeah, it is an act of love. Sure,
It's the ultimate act of love of brother.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's what I think is what attracts me to this case, and what attracts me to the people in this case is not the gore, it's the love of brother. You know, to be that tight with a group of people that you would do that. You know, I think that everybody, when you're in your early 20s, you're coming of age, and the group of people, I mean, the people I was around when I was in my early 20s, I have special memories of them, and we went through things together, and, you know, a lot of growing up and the kind of being on your own at first and living away and doing anything you wanted. A lot of it's, well, I just think that you look back on things that happened in that time, you think, boy, I never would have done that now.
Right.
You know, at the age of 50 or 60, you think, God, how could I think that that was the right thing to do? But at the time, it was the right thing to do. And, you know, I can't imagine that, of course, if you're so full of anger and hate, I guess like someone like Susan is, I just can't help but think that somebody like Leslie Van Houten or Patricia Krenwinkel or anyone else would look back at that time and say, but it was good. You know, it was love. It was right.
You know, after that one conversation you and I had, I went back and I just went from 78 to 2004 of Patricia's parole hearings. And if you read it directly, she doesn't blame him at all. All she specifically sticks to is the story she told in the first parole hearing. I was watching the kids. I was asleep in the trailer. Charlie came in, woke me up, and said, go with Tex and do what Tex says. And she's always stuck to that. I read. I stopped at 2004.
Well, we know, as you said, and you commented on sending me the letter that she wrote to Newell Emmons, that she was still friendly.
The friendship would be forever enduring
towards Charles Manson in 1981. So sometime after that, certainly by the time she got to Diane Sawyer, she had soured on him, and then she's gone through cycles too, where, you know, well, now that I think about it, I was abused. Although I will say this, at her last parole hearing, the one where they let her out, or they said she could get out, I thought she gave a very good explanation of her character and how she could be used by someone. She just said, I didn't have a lot of will and not a lot to me, so I was ready to serve people. And so that's what I did.
Yep.
She kind of recognized that and said, I should have been stronger, and said no. You know, and of course, you know, it's a heck of a thing when mistake in your life is that you killed 7 people. You know, that's a little different than wrecking a car or something. You know, that's a big mistake that's going to affect you for the rest of your life. So you can't look. I could look back on something I did when I was 21 and say, my God, what were you possibly thinking that you could do that? But it didn't have the same consequences that these people have, where they're out and they're getting worse and worse and worse every day, and they're getting on in years. I don't know what they're going to do with them.
But it is very interesting that it's safe to say that Bobby, because I went back and I read Bobby's 1978 parole hearing, and I've got some of it, you know, pulled up.
Okay.
And he says that he's the one that slashed Gary's face, and that Charlie and Bruce just came when he called to get the pink slips and the vehicles, and they left. And then right after that, Charlie's the one that slashed Gary's face. So,
and then Charlie said he slashed Gary's face, and Bruce said he slashed Gary's face, and there's so many different versions about what went on there. When did the gun go off? Did Gary have a gun? Did Charlie just show up and Gary answered the door and say, hi, Charlie, and he just slashed him for no reason? Or did Gary have a gun, and did the gun go off? I think is Mary Brunner in her testimony said there were a couple of fights over the gun. One, I think, when Charlie got there. She said also that Charlie got cut very badly on his hand during that incident.
She did.
Uh, uh, so, you know, and of course, Susan in the penalty phase is telling different things about when the gun went off. It went off twice. It went off when the gun went off, and then Charlie hit. So, yeah, again, unfortunately, we just don't know what the real story is.
But, you know, this right here goes in with something we talked about, George, because, you know, we mentioned around the same time when things started to kind of shift. The board member Brown says you came to grips with this then in about 1976. Is that right? He said, no, before that. This was the first righteous opportunity that I had to bring it up at my board meeting. And then board member Brown says it was in 1970 when you came to grips with this? Probably about 2 years before I went to the board. And that's when Charlie said around the time he sent Bobby that letter.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I know that Charlie knew he was a goner pretty early on. And he certainly behaved like it, not like he ever wanted to get out. But of all the people back then that made commitments to each other, he's the only one who kept his commitment to the end. I think,
you know, Charlie didn't want to get out. You know, the system was all he actually ever really knew. In my mind, I think it was just he wanted the fair trial. He was denied his constitutional right.
Right. Yeah, that was his big gripe for sure. Yeah, getting out. You know, that's funny. Sure, he was institutionalized, but I just can't imagine that he wouldn't want to get out and walk around in nature. You know.
Yeah, that, and at the same time, it's all he knew.
Pardon me?
I said basically it's all he knew.
Right. And that's what he was doing when he was arrested. I mean, for all the conniving and drug dealing he was supposed to be doing, he was arrested under a bathroom sink.
That I still don't think how in the world it was possible, because he was not 5'2".
Well, yeah, you know, it's funny. Yeah, that's another thing. That's very strange, because that picture of the sink, not to digress too much, but it has a bar going across it. It has a bar going across it. I've been to Barker Ranch. The sink was gone, but you could see where it was, and it's like, and he's not 5'2" anyway,
right?
You know, and then there's another odd thing about that was when they were saying, one of the cops was saying, I went back in. They busted the ranch about as it was getting dark, and I went back in the house, and Bill Vance was coming out of the bedroom, and we had missed him before. Well, Barker Ranch is, you know, how could you miss him? He must have been outside the window and climbed in.
If anybody has ever been to Barker Ranch, and I have been out to Barker, it's all when it was before it burnt down, it was just basically an open space on the inside. That's it. Yeah. So how could he be missed?
Yeah, how could he be missed? Yeah. So that's odd. Bill Vance, I think he was kind of a large guy too.
Yeah, Bill was, if I can remember correctly, I think he was 6'3".
Yeah. So many unanswered questions about this case. Of course, it's so complicated. How can it not be? But one thing I want to do is get back to Susan Atkins and all of her various versions of her story about what life was and everything. We've seen that she's contradicted herself on just about everything. Charlie was love. Charlie was evil. The ranch was great. The ranch was, you know, I was stuck there. I couldn't go anywhere else, you know. You're a 20-year-old woman. Come on, you're in LA. You couldn't go somewhere else.
Yeah, and then like in the I will say in the rough draft version of the myth of Helter Skelter, which was originally supposed to be called the Shattered Myth of Helter Skelter, but she actually does talk about Mama Cass, showing her how to make BLTs.
Okay.
Yeah,
that could be. That could be.
That was when she was supposedly living close to Janis Joplin.
Okay. Well, I'm going to let somebody else run with that conspiracy theory, where that goes. But because Because sure, a lot of those people knew each other. It seems like LA was a lot smaller community back then.
You know, if my aunt, for example, with her band, of course they knew and the celebrity was they knew everybody. I mean, if you went to Coven House, which was right on Miller Drive, which is 5 minutes away from CLO, you'd show up and Alice Cooper and his people would be there. The guys from Led Zeppelin were there when they came to America. I mean, so they all knew each other at some point.
Sure, and if you behaved yourself, you could get in anywhere practically.
Yeah.
So none of that's a surprise. But getting back to Susan, and in all the things she's changed, one thing she hasn't changed, and that she's adamant about and almost insistent about, is that always the motive for the murders was to commit copycat crimes that would get Bobby Beausoleil out of jail. So the fact that she has reiterated that in this book, her first book, the penalty phase of the trial, and many times in parole hearings, she said the same thing, leads me to think that she must believe that that was the reason. And that leads me to believe that there's a possibility that the reason she believes
it's because
is because it's true. And that, I think, is an instance where, with all her lying and contradicting herself and changing her stories, that's the one thing she hasn't changed. And I think it's because she believes it's true. And I think she believes it's true because it is true.
The truth.
Yeah. So there we have an inadvertent confirmation from Susan Atkins that the violent events of the summer of 1969 started with Bernard Crowe, that the Tate LaBianca murders were a progression that grew out of that, and favors owed back and forth. Crowe, Hinman, Watson, Beausoleil, Manson, Atkins, Kasabian. To me, it all fits.
You know, she pretty much, with the exception, because, you know, we've talked about the drug burn in the past. I'm not going to say it happened. I'm not going to say it didn't happen. But when I got to thinking about it the other day, it was actually somebody messaged me and we were talking about some things. And I got to thinking about it because, you know, I was telling him about the copycat, the love of brother. And I got to thinking, Linda supposedly had this money around. They didn't have the bail money for Mary. And Sandra, of course, got released. When they were released. So they didn't have the bail money for Mary, and they didn't have the bail money for Bobby. So if they had that money, like it's been claimed, if they had all this money that has been claimed, how could they not come up with a bail?
You mean if they had the money to do the dope deal?
Yeah. Because the dope deal would have happened right before the murders. That's the only logical explanation.
Right. And we narrowed it down too. Between a certain amount of time when that could have
Linda arrived, you know, there's a discrepancy in the date. Nobody can remember if it's June the 26th or the 28th.
I heard July 4th.
July the 4th?
I heard it was the day after, right after Crowe.
Okay, well, she arrived in Los Angeles in June the 26th or the 28th, one of those 3 days.
Okay, so it gives her a couple of days.
Gypsy takes her to Spawn.
Right.
There's just not enough time for that to happen because on June the 5th is when she stole the money.
Right. July 5th.
Yeah, July the 5th is when she stole the money.
Right.
How is she going? And there is no physical proof that Tex Watson knew Wojciech Frykowski or Jay Sebring.
No, there's no proof. It's possible, but there's no link.
Right. I mean,
it's possible.
Yeah, it's possible, but no proof.
Right.
But I do recall in Ed Sanders' book, there was a woman who went to visit Frykowski the day before the murders, and she was with a girl named Linda. Didn't know who it was. It was a doctor's wife and Linda. It's in Ed Sanders' The Family.
Okay. I'll have to look at that because most of what I get on the movements of Frykowski the day of the murder. Are you saying the day of the murders or the day before the murders?
The day before.
Okay.
Because the day of the murders,
you mean the day before? You mean like August 7th, or you mean
August 7th? Yeah.
Okay.
There was the supposed get together on August the 7th, and it was a doctor's wife and a girl named Linda.
Okay, so August 7th.
And Mary and Sandra were arrested on August the 8th that day.
Right.
So they had the money. And Bobby, when was it Bobby called?
Well, he was arrested on the, let me think, he was arrested. He called them on the 6th.
Okay. And this happened on the 7th.
Yeah.
Because I've got it somewhere and I'll have to dig it out because Bobby stated that he called Spawn Ranch. And of course, he later said he didn't because there was only a payphone there. But we know that's not true because even Barbara Hoyt and Diane Lake testified that there was a field phone.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually got Spawn Ranch cards
Mm-hmm.
that has the 2 phone numbers on there. There was 2 numbers at Spawn Ranch.
Okay. Wasn't there a phone in George's house?
Yes. The last 4 digits of George's phone number. Hang on, I'll pull it up. The last 4 digits of George's phone number was, because I've got the cards right here, a picture. George's was not 9026. That was the last 2 numbers, the last 4 numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And the field phone number was 8098. And if you want a picture of this, I will.
You mean the payphone?
Barbara Hoyt said it was a field phone.
Okay, well, field phone to me is like a walkie-talkie. I'd like to see those. I would like to see those if you want to send them to me.
Yeah, I'll send them to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's got the first number, and we know the first number is George Spawn's because when he purchased the property, he never had the phone number changed.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the phone book addressing at that time, and I can send you another picture of that as well,
Mm-hmm.
The 9026 is listed as his phone number.
Okay. Okay.
And I'll send both of those to you.
Okay.
I didn't know if you had that or not.
No, I do not. I'm thinking of how much.
You will soon.
Yes, I'm wondering how much that narrows the time frame down. So for her to, yeah, boy.
Because
supposedly she got 5,000 from the trailer, and I've heard that she turned it all over, or that she turned over 4,000 and kept 1,000.
She said that she gave it all to Leslie Van Houten.
Yeah.
During the trial.
Yeah.
So.
But that's Linda, and that could be self-serving. Maybe she doesn't want to say I had 2,000 and I made a deal with Wojciech Kwiatkowski.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, and I do know because Abigail's mother's police report, where the police interviewed her, is out there. And if it is so, then it would make sense that Kwiatkowski would be dealing drugs because Abigail was fixing to leave him. He had no other source of income.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, I think dealing drugs is often made a lot simpler, made to sound a lot simpler than it really is. When I hear people saying that Wojciech was going to corner the market on MDA in Los Angeles, I have to laugh because there would have probably been 1,000 MDA dealers in LA once the drug became available. And there's no such thing as cornering the market.
Now Mike says, okay, then what phone did Bobby call? George's.
Yes.
Bobby said that he called. He didn't specify which phone he called, but he later said it was a pay phone. Mm-hmm. And I think that was in the Truman Capote interview. Mm-hmm. But he specifically stated in one interview that he called Spawn Ranch. Linda answered the phone, mm-hmm. and he told Linda that he was arrested for the murder of Gary Hinman. And I know there to be some truth to this because in Linda's testimony, she's asked, how did you learn about the murder of Gary Hinman? And she said, I heard it from Bobby. Hmm. Then she said, I heard the rest of it from Mary. Mm-hmm. Bobby said that in that little short conversation, Linda was upset and asked what they could do to get him out. And he said that she suggested copycat killings.
Mm-hmm. Now, what's the source for this again?
I will have to get that interview and send it to you.
Is it Capote?
I don't think it is.
Okay.
Because I know Mike and I were actually talking about something, and Mike sent me a message wanting to know if there was any kind of documentation that Bobby called Spawn Ranch, because the story later changed that he didn't call because that was just a payphone. And I sent him an article from Rolling Stone, and that's the one where he said that it was an article. And Mike, did we ever find one where he said that he did call? I can't remember because there's been so much. Mm-hmm. But I do know, and I will get that to you, that interview, because he said that, hang on, I'm pulling up the links right now.
Okay.
The last Manson mystery. This is Rolling Stone. This is the one where he said that there was no phone.
Mm-hmm.
You better pray I never get out.
Mm-hmm.
Manson tells friend at sanity trial. Okay, he even admits in the parole hearing, actually, the one that I read from earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I skipped right over it. He admits that he called Spawn Ranch twice.
Mm-hmm.
Once when they got there, two for Charlie and Bobby Charlie and Bruce to come and get the vehicles,
Mm-hmm.
and then there was a third call that was made.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "No more than I could. I'm at war with everybody in this courtroom. It's nothing personal." I think it's in this one he says that he called.
That must be an early parole hearing.
That one from 78. This article is from 1973. His retrial.
Okay, yeah, because I know that later on he was saying he didn't call Charlie, and Charlie told me that he did call him. So here you go again. You know, who called who? You know, who called from Gary Hinman's house? Who did Bobby call when he was arrested? I guess if you're working on some theories about dealing and things, none of that's really important from the point of view I'm coming from, because what time the phone calls were made doesn't matter, as long as they were made within the time frame that some reaction could be caused by whatever was said in the call. Like,
I did some digging because, this was another thing that Mike had asked me concerning that situation. Mary and Sandra were arrested around 4 p.m. that day from the Sears business.
mm-hmm.
So it was around that time that Linda claimed that she went to see Mary and Sandra thereafter, and they were in court, so she didn't get to see them.
You're saying she went?
She said, Linda said that they only sent her to talk to Mary and Sandra, but when Linda got there, they were in court, so she didn't get to see them.
Okay.
And then he sent her to talk to Bobby, which would make sense if that is true. But she said she didn't get to talk to Bobby to keep his mouth quiet, stay quiet.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know why he wouldn't stay quiet, because he's the one who killed Hinman.
Sandra got out shortly after that court hearing, I believe it was. She was released in no time, actually.
Yeah, I forget what she remembers in reflection. I think she spent the next night in jail, and then they cut her loose. I think she got home the day after the LaBianca murders.
Right.
So she must have been kept for a little while, and before they cut her loose.
Right, because if I remember correctly, she learned about the murders after it happened.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not a big conspiracy among 30 people sitting around.
No, like Susan, it was like Ella Jo Bailey, because when I went back and I started to, when I saw that Susan was kind of backing her in her 85 parole hearing, I went back and read what Ella said, and then Ella claims that everybody, 40 people at Spawn Ranch, were all involved in it, all talking about what to do with Hinman.
Yeah, you'd think people would be a little quiet about something like that, but I know for sure that Sandy didn't know about. Probably Hinman. She knew. Yeah, she must have known about Hinman, but she didn't know about Tate LaBianca until after it happened. Sometime after it happened. So
because
I don't know if she knew about Crow either. Believe it or not, folks, I don't ask her a lot of questions about when did you make the phone call, and we're not doing that kind of stuff.
Well, so Mike and I were having a conversation. I was like, hold on, let me dig through that. And I started digging through the archives, and they were in court. The fiasco happened at 4 p.m. at Sears.
Mm-hmm.
But they had already, I guess you could say they could, by the time it got to the court and Linda went to see them, according to her testimony, they had already said they wasn't even concerned with Sandra anyway, because she didn't even have the credit cards on her.
Right.
But Linda had testified, stated.
Right. If they were arrested on a Friday, what would a weekend do to affect jail releases and things like that and court stuff? Would that stop it for a weekend or?
Well, if she didn't have because she didn't sign the credit card slip. Mary forged the name.
Okay.
She didn't sign the credit card slip, and she personally didn't have the credit card's owner. It would seem while they were in front of the judge, he would cut her loose then. That's what it would seem like. Because Linda contends it happened at 4 p.m., around 4 p.m., but Linda contends that she went to go, Charlie sent her to talk to Mary and Sandra.
Mm-hmm.
But when she got there, which it kind of doesn't make sense, because if that happened at 4 p.m., then how were they in court unless they had a special sessions?
Well, yeah, and plus, if it happened at 4 p.m., how long would it take for them to get to the police station, to be booked, to wait to be booked, to be transferred wherever they were going? What time is it now on a Friday night?
By 10 p.m. is what it approximately showed that Sandra had been released, if the time is right.
Not Friday night.
No.
I know she spent at least one night in jail. Yeah. But anyway, that's interesting. But how much of an effect it has on at least my point of view, I don't know.
Right.
You can split these hairs all you want and go in all kinds of different directions. But sadly, I found a solution that works for me, and so far I haven't seen anything that contradicts it. I know there are a lot of other things out there, but I'm still waiting for somebody to say, aha, but so-and-so was clearly not here when that happened. Therefore, your theory is not correct.
If that timeline is correct and Linda did keep the money, why was it not used for the bail?
Yeah.
Because it was Leslie who suggested getting an attorney, and I think it was one of the others said that, why would we get an attorney? They'll just lie and take our money.
Right. Yeah.
And it was clear they didn't have the money.
Right, sure.
Because if you read, Tex was pretty upset that they only got $73, $74 from.
Right.
Yeah.
And supposedly if they were sent out to get money for bail, they clearly didn't have money.
No, and Leslie only took like $8 in coins from the LaBiancas.
Mm-hmm.
That's what she admitted to counting. Actually, Diane Lake helped her count $8 worth. That's as much as Diane claims she knew she had.
Wow. Well.
Yeah, anyway. It's Diane's book.
Yeah, I'll have to read that. I do have that. That's one of the many books I have that I have not read.
I read it, and that's why I was talking to you earlier about that chapter that's titled in The Myth of Helter Skelter about the Black Riders. That's where, I don't know if she's trying to, Susan said that they were just Black Riders. They came out to Spawn Ranch just to ride, but Diane Lake said that she was told that they were Black Panthers. And Leslie said,
sure, but I think there was some concern, and I think that Lynn mentioned that in her book, that, boy, we never had Black Riders out here. Maybe they are Black Panthers. So somebody said, those aren't Black Riders, they're Black Panthers. And little 14-year-old Diane said, oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what I was getting to, because, Lynette kind of mentioned it. And Lynette, it said that Lynette answered the phone when it came in that a member of the Black Panther Party had been shot and killed and dropped off at the hospital.
Mm-hmm. Well, I went down. That's another funny aspect about this, because I went down and searched the back issues of the LA papers for around that time for days in either direction. I couldn't find anything about any news report about a Black Panther being shot around July 1st. There was an incident over in LA where 2 Black Panthers got shot, but it was a month or so earlier than that, and it was totally a different circumstance. So I don't know where that story came from, that somebody heard somewhere, these people that supposedly never read newspapers and didn't have a TV, heard that a Black Panther had been killed and dumped in Griffith Park or variously UCLA. So that's yet another one of the unanswered questions about this story. But nevertheless, it'd be very reasonable for Charlie Manson to assume that the guy was dead since he shot him and he saw him drop in the apartment. You might think, gee, maybe he's dead, whether you heard anything more about it or not. Because, little killings like that, they don't even get reported.
No. And considering it was still the late 60s as well. So,
yeah.
That played a role in the lack of.
Yeah, so that to me is another oddity about this case. Where did that story come from? Where did the story about Gary Hinman's inheritance come from? All these things that people say, well, these are all things, and a lot of the theories that have come up about the crime since are the same thing. Where do these stories come from? If there's no evidence backing them that you can find as far as timelines, as I said, or physical evidence, or knowing where people were at certain times and comparing what they said and seeing if it even makes sense, there's just so much that you are never going to know because it's such a mess. Too complicated, too many people saying too many different things.
And like and unlike popular belief, people like Barbara Hoyt and Diane Lake, they weren't in the know of anything because they were, especially Barbara, because she was barely around.
Right.
So
and who knew what? I mean, they didn't have conferences or sitting around going over there. Who
they weren't
time today. I mean,
the only thing that Diane had she was like, she knew Leslie. Barbara stated that the boy that took them back to Spawn, they hitchhiked after the LaBianca murders, was coming back, and Leslie demanded that she hide her.
Right.
She didn't want to be seen by her. And then she said when she walked in, she was counting coins. But Barbara didn't say anything about Diane Lake being there. But Diane Lake says she counted $8 in coins with Leslie.
Mm-hmm.
So see?
Yeah. Well, thankfully, I'm going to leave those kind of details for other people to sort out because that doesn't really. A lot of that stuff, it is interesting, but it doesn't have anything to do with what I'm after. So
right,
I can indulge my propensity for minutia occasionally, but I don't take it too seriously. Did Stephen Parent's car have white wall tires on it? I don't know.
Yeah, and as soon as this is over, I just got that little piece saved from the old phone book from 1969.
Pardon me?
And I'll email that to you, those cards from Spawn and the clipping from the phone book as well.
Okay.
So you'll have that. And that's how we know which one was Spawn. And I don't think that they would list a payphone on the card, would you?
No.
No, it doesn't make sense. So if Bobby called one of those numbers, so one of them had to be a working phone somewhere on that ranch.
Yeah. And don't forget Rosina Kroner called the branch too. Yeah. And I think that was the payphone. But I don't know.
Well, she claims and Child of Satan, Child of God, Susan Atkins claimed that Rosina was not Tex's fiance. They were not dating. I don't remember that exact detail, how they got acquainted. But she said that apparently Rosina had remembered the number that Tex had called at the ranch once before. And that's how she called. So I don't know how much stock that Susan puts into that. But that just sounds, how can she remember that number that Tex called, that she saw Tex call? Yeah. Well, some people have good memories. I sure don't. I hear modern day. I hear people in the line at the supermarket giving up their numbers all the time, and I can't remember any of them, so I can't do anything with it. Yeah, since this modern age, I can't remember phone numbers. Well, okay. I think we've gone through Susan Atkins pretty thoroughly. Of course, one thing in this case leads to another, and you can go on and on and on. But I do want to say my personal takeaway from all of this, from examining her I call them the four testaments of Susan Atkins, grand jury, penalty, child of God, and the myth of Helter Skelter. Not in fact, and all of her parishioners, he's very insistent on the fact that love of brother was the motive for the murders. and
that
that there
fits.
was a timeline.
It fits the timeline. It fits the dynamics of the personalities. Much of what we know about them anyway.
Mhm.
It fits not only the timeline as far as the days, but it fits the time as far as how long they were in the house. I mean, clearly they only went to Cielo Drive to kill people because that's all they did. They left, they killed people and left.
Right.
The reason to go there was to kill people, not to rob them or anything else, because they couldn't have been there that long. They were just there long enough to do the job and get out, and almost forget to write pig on the door.
Mega Zorlak asked, did Linda Kay visit Bobby in jail? She claims she didn't get to.
I heard she didn't get to, and I could be misremembering this because she didn't have ID.
Yeah, she claims she didn't have her ID on her.
But supposedly she was the only one on the ranch with ID.
Right. And
she didn't take it to the jail. Okay.
Right. So see, there's.
Boy, that's too bad.
It's like you said. I mean, Susan, she makes it clear, even though she constantly was changing stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why at one point she wanted to start back in Ella Jo Bailey.
Mm-hmm.
But she lays it down pretty specifically that there is a timeline that was crucial to what happened to Cielo and Waverly Drive.
Mm-hmm.
And she makes it explicitly clear, like you said, that the shooting of Bernard Crowe was the catalyst, igniting the fuse.
Right. It triggered a series of unfortunate criminal events that totally got out of hand.
And I mean, even the copycat point. I mean, even in itself, I can understand that they were willing to give up their lives for Bobby, but they had to have known on some level they would have gotten caught.
Well, to me, it's just a bad plan. I mean,
very bad plan.
Charlie asked me once, he said, what would you have done to get Bobby out? And I said, I would have gotten a couple guys with rifles and tried to take him when they were moving him, like from jail to the court.
Yeah.
That's what I would have done. And he didn't think too much of that idea, but that's what I came up with. I wouldn't have said, let's go out and kill a bunch of people and the police will think this and then they'll think that and then they'll think that and they'll put this together and they'll think the same people murdered Sharon Tate Polanski has killed Gary Hinman. Well, of course they're going to think that because the same people did do it. But not very smart. I would have said, of course, I don't know how adamant he was about he seems pretty mad. Take care of it. Do something about it now. Can we have a few days to think about this, or do we have to do something tonight?
Well, if you believe what Patricia said, she said it was a thought that happened.
Yep.
They got in the car and they left.
And the thought came to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. It was just a thought, and then the thought came to be. So I think that's a good place to leave this episode, with that thought.
Yep. And if there's another one like you want to dive into, like Paul Watkins, I've been reading up on that one again. We can hit that one too.
Yeah, I've said there's so many books about this case, and so many of them are bullshit. But I do believe that any book written by a case participant is at least worth looking at. So that's kind of why, after I stopped doing reviews of books, that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this one. One, because of the similarities between it and my own book. I want to see it. But also because it is a testament by one of the participants. So you have to kind of look at it. You can't ignore it.
Right. And then, I mean, if you look at Child of Satan, Child of God, it's very, very similar to her grand jury testimony.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you go back to, I believe that clip I sent you, George, was from 92. I believe it was. Where she admits that everything that she said past the grand jury was not true.
Mm-hmm. Boy. Better go with the party line.
Yep.
Didn't do her any good. Well, okay. Well, my takeaway from this is that Susan Atkins thought love her brother was the motive for the murders, and that's a pretty strong indicator to me that it was. So She had plenty of opportunity. She changed her story so many times. She could have easily changed it and said that Charlie was involved in a drug deal. She could have said anything else, but as I said, sometimes even a pathological liar can't help but tell the truth.
Every once in a while.
And I think that's what happened here. And so I'm going to leave you to your frogs and leave everybody else to the rest of their evening. And I want to thank you, James, for coming on again. You're a very good guest.
Thank you.
Almost a co-host. And you're very good. You may be a co-host. You said, I never knew where this podcast was going to go when I started it. So I don't know where it's going to go. And, you know, if I were just going to sit here and talk to people, I can go back to doing my recorded little movies.
Right.
I think the interaction is better and it's new. So we'll see how that goes. I'm not going to come up with something every week. I don't want to be the guy, they got the guy with the Cielo Drive door on line 1. That's really interesting, but there are so many interesting things about this that I'm not going to be talking about because, you know, as I said, there's so many other things to do. So we'll leave it at tonight. We've been an hour and a half, and that's very good. I hope that everybody watching has enjoyed the show, that you've got something out of it, and that we're getting a little bit closer to determining what actually happened in summer of 1969 in Los Angeles, California. So until next time, I'm going to say to everybody, good night. Thanks for coming, James.
It was a pleasure.
I hope everybody enjoyed the podcast. We'll see you next time.
This has been the Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast, the podcast dedicated to the truth about the Tate LaBianca murders, Charles Manson, and more. The views expressed on this program are solely those of the individual speakers, and they do not necessarily represent the thoughts, ideas, or opinions of any other persons, either living or dead. Visit our companion website at www.goodbyehelterskelter.com. There you can find more information about this podcast. Also, check out the Goodbye Helter Skelter Facebook page for information on upcoming programs. And let us know what you think by way of contact@goodbyehelterskelter.com. We will address any comments, questions, or concerns on future installments of the Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast.